Vimeo changed my life. I had this constant need to film, make these creations, and share them with everyone. I've been making videos since I was a kid, and when I uploaded my first video to Vimeo, it launched me out into the world. I became part of this community of other creators who help fuel each other, hone our crafts, network and learn, get discovered and inspired. It's a place where you're appreciated and seen.
Hi everyone, this is Connie and
this is Joanne.
And we're your moderators for week 3, participation and creation.
So you've seen that video that we showed. I thought it was a fitting video for this week's discussion, as Maddie Brown was talking about his experience, which relates so much in this week's reading of participation and creation and the whole participatory culture framework that seems to be very relevant and you could really see in the interactions in social media.
Well, Chow's 2010 participatory culture framework has 5 pieces to it, and I definitely think that 5 pieces are present at different stages of participation. For me, it really starts with creation. In order for you to participate in something, I think that you have to actually create. You have to make a post, you have to upload a photo, you have to share a video, because otherwise you don't really have anything to share. And so after you create something, even if it's as simple just recording yourself or maybe more complex, like mixing different mediums together, then you share it, and then as you share it, people comment, and that helps you form social connections. And after you've gone through that cycle a few times, then ultimately you become a contributor because you start catering to your audience. And then you become a mentor, whether people are reaching out specifically to you or whether you're just creating resources for them. But I don't think it's so much that you have to have all factors present at the same time. I don't think that's possible. Last week when we were looking at Stack Exchange and Quora, you had to have a certain level of reputation in order to even just upvote or downvote. So I don't think it's possible to do some of these more advanced things like mentorship and social connection until you've been through some of these other stages first.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there definitely is like a cycle to it. I also think that there's perhaps different levels of participation. The participation just in the periphery where you just view and upload videos to the topmost of the search engine. Would you consider that a participation, or does it have to be like an active creation or sharing of media or of a content to consider it participation? But definitely in different formats, there's just like what you said in Stack Exchange, there's deeper sense of participation there where you have to really answer questions, think about your answers. But I think more than anything, all these participation are results of all the creation. Keatsman has mentioned how this has all tremendously changed how we all use internet just to access information. We really transition from consumption of content to creators or creation of content.
Well, I definitely think the capability is there. YouTube has been around for a while, and Chow talks a lot about how it's such a simple platform to record yourself and even now record yourself live, upload and share. But there are a number of social media apps that don't just make it easy to upload, what you're doing is you're walking around your house, but really make it easier to upload quality stuff. So for example, the camera app, if you've got a smartphone, you've got a camera on your phone, you can take whatever pictures. You don't have to be a professional photographer. But Lisa is this new social media assistant that was developed recently that will actually pick the best photo out of a certain set of photos in your library. And so not only is it easier for you to take a picture because you've got a camera in your phone, but it's also easier for you to pick a quality photo, which then within the Lisa app, you can actually share right from there.
I agree. All of these neat social media apps that's been coming out and people continue to create, I guess it's what we call the low barriers, right? Everyone can almost do it. Even my 6-year-old daughter can create media and then can share it. With this other graph that we have here from 2006 to 2011, back in 2006, they call it the 99-1 rule, where there's like 90% lurkers and 1% creators, and the in between of commenters. Like, just between 2006 and 2011, we can see how the number of creators have gone up from 1% to 10%. And I don't know what the real numbers are now. So I think just because of the ease of use of all these creation tools, there has been a lot more creator and a lot more content out there.
Well, speaking of the real numbers, I actually went on Statista and I took a look at some of the real numbers for media usage. And here's the thing, there's definitely a transition to making media creation simpler. There's definitely been a transition to making media sharing simpler, but a lot of people are still falling into that lurkers category that you mentioned in the previous slide. You've got 18 million people who are just checking the weather, 4 million people who are watching YouTube videos, and that's compared, if you don't count the spam emails. I don't know if you count that or not as participation. It's certainly not, I would argue, meaningful participation. You compare that to 15 million people or text messages being sent per minute, or sorry, excuse me, this is number of people. This is just amount per minute. So 18 million requests being received by the Weather Channel to check the weather versus 15 million text messages being sent per minute. And so there's definitely more consumption happening, 18 versus 15, 4 million versus half a million. But what I'm noticing is that with the advent of new apps, you're seeing more different types of media creation and sharing. So that's kind of interesting.
Because there's like all these like different types of social media. I think there has been already this like category of which one you have to use depending on what your goal is, what your purpose is. And we found one of these like social media cheat sheet for like people who does branding, right? And even just for personal use, this is helpful because, people use, let's say, for example, LinkedIn for their careers or like their professional profile, and uses, as opposed to using Facebook, which they just use for social connection, which probably all their friends are there and all. I mean, there's a little bit of mixing, slight mixing of careers and friends there, but more than anything, if you want to put a reputation, I noticed like for people from LinkedIn, they put like more of like professional photos, or like they'll never post something that, I don't know, like eating ice cream or just goofing around or like having like a beer party or something like that, It's not something that you would do in LinkedIn. So there's definitely a certain form of like curation in terms of your own identity, like how you really want to project yourself out there.
So it is interesting, like you said, that users will manage different aspects of their identity, that being one part of Keatsman's model of the honeycomb of social media. So in Keatsman's model, different social media tools will focus on different aspects of the honeycomb. So you may have some tools that focus on identity and reputation and how users share it. So tying that back into what you said about having multiple identities, sometimes how users will manage the identities is they'll decide what to share on what platform. Sometimes they'll even overshare in some respects so that people don't dig deeper and really get involved in things that they like to keep private. Dana Boyd will talk about how teenagers will sometimes share on social media, if there's like a picture of a girl and a guy, then the girl might preemptively post, "Oh, my cousin came to town." And so in that way, they don't have to worry about people asking questions about who this is, what's their relationship status, and they've protected their identity and their reputation by not just how they choose to share on the different platforms, but also what they choose to share on the different platforms.
True. I also think that, with different things that we share, especially when it comes to like our personal lives, say, for example, I would have a friend like I haven't seen for like 10 years, right? You're connected and you see their feeds and all, just with like the little bits of information that they share. These things forms like a bigger picture of their identity, or at least like what their life is or where they are at their life at the moment. So I find that also interesting, that no matter how we would curate and screen like what we want to post or preempt like people like making other conceptions about us, putting all these like little bits and pieces together creates this whole picture of who we are or what we do.
Yeah, it really fosters those sorts of relationships when you choose what to share, and you give everybody those little pieces so they feel like they know you and they're able to have conversations about each of those little pieces.
Yeah.
And so in that way, kind of stay in contact by commenting on one photo. You don't have to have an hour long conversation.
Or just an update on like where I'm now,
Yeah,
what I'm doing, right? It's interesting, like the reasons why people share. And Keatsman has mentioned and elaborated a lot more. Various things why people would share online. Would share because perhaps we want to meet new-minded people, perhaps share ideas or collaborate or build their self-esteem. Or if you're very much into like a cause and you want to make an impact. And so social media is a good, very, very good platform to like raise awareness and even to find true love, as cute as it may be, but people do it. They use social media to put themselves out there and like just dating apps and like find somebody that hopefully they can live the rest of their lives with. So very interesting that even at a very personal note, people turn into social media. The idea of like self-concept, like, how we would reflect on ourselves based on like how people's perception are about us. This is important for us, it's like seeing how many people like that feed or, this is an idea of workplaces, like or how people see us, right? So I think it's like, because of all these like sharing, there's different ways of sharing, I think it's important. There's just like the role of the educators to this students who are very much involved in social media.
yeah, I definitely think there's a role for teachers to play in terms of modeling for students what creation and what sharing looks like. So, going back to what we've talked about with creation, uh, creating combinations of images and text and sound on their own. Um, Earlier, we had a debate about whether the cycle of participation really starts with creation. Well, if we think it does as educators, then we need to be the ones who are taking the first steps and making our own media and making it appropriately, really following copyright law when we're mashing things up, other people's images or text or sound for presentations or for videos, and teaching students to do these things by giving them exposure to tools that will protect their privacy so they don't have to worry as much about identity management, and enabling them to interact with objects of sociality that they have in common. Because the more that they can interact on things that they have in common, whether it be an in-class assignment or an outside interest, the more that they're able to really create together. But the thing about mentorship in a social media sense is that social media has taught us a lot about the skills that we need to mentor, that we need to teach students through mentorship, but it's also taught us about the availability of mentors, I think, that are out there, which is why, going back to what we talked about with all the different types of social media platforms that are out there and the need for appropriate participation on these different platforms, we really need to teach students how to seek out mentors online that can take them further than we could, or that they could just go ahead and start learning from, so that when they leave us as students, they continually have resources. A student that's exposed to a scientist over Skype, for instance, they've made a connection, and maybe in the future they'll write that scientist to ask them other questions or to try and intern in their lab. Um, an educator that goes to a conference and meets someone that's doing something really interesting across the globe. Maybe they start following them on Twitter and they're able to set up joint projects for their classes. But none of that can happen unless they're participating in appropriate ways, and unless they're being both positive and productive. Pernell Rip, who I referenced in my intro video, she's really big into student blogging, and she teaches her students to make highway comments so that they can continue academic conversations. Because when you're making those sorts of connections academically, and people realize that you have interesting things to say, they're more likely to reply back. And then you can build relationships across social media platforms, but also potentially in person as well. Um, I think it's really interesting for us to consider social media as educators because there's definitely been some progress in terms of learning management systems. Do you know what a learning management system is?
Yeah, 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 of course. And I'm actually interesting to hear um, things that you use in your class, the tools that you use in your class that models like this whole social media interaction to support learning in the classroom.
Yeah, so there are a number of tools that I've used with my students in terms of creation. Um, got a variety of media creation apps like GarageBand for music or ThingLink for images or Animoto for slideshows or videos. But there's also a number of apps that I use not just for creation, but really to focus in on sharing and teaching my students how to interact in appropriate ways and to seek out mentors that are beyond me. Um, so obviously, with regards to learning management systems, there are online platforms that allow um, students and teachers to come together and manage all aspects of their education, or at least this is the theory. So I have other colleagues that will use things like Edmodo, which is basically a Facebook-looking platform for some of these same purposes. Edmodo is considered a course management system because it doesn't give you all of the analytics and doesn't help you manage as many aspects of the learning in a classroom as a learning management system like Canvas does. Um, but nonetheless, it's really helpful for giving students that feedback on assignments. Google Classroom, which works in a similar way, it's a place for students to get resources and also to turn in assignments and get feedback on them. I have a colleague who started using the question feature in Google Classroom to run his Google Classroom kind of like a blog. So he would post a question, and then he would have students respond by commenting back to the question. They'd have discussions about all sorts of different philosophical issues, and they would have these sort of online debates. If you want to teach students about how to interact appropriately online and how to decide what to post, what not to post, how to find people who are who can be resources for them and can be mentors that they can reach out to online. It can start as simple as something that's managed by the teacher, like Skype or Twitter. Skype, you find an expert or you have your students get online and look up the names of different professors and fields. And then you call them up and you're managing the conversation because you're calling on students to come up and ask their question to the expert. But they're still using that social media, and now they know about another tool that they could use to contact experts in the future if they have a question. Same thing with Twitter. Our district doesn't allow students to post on Twitter, but we can post on Twitter for them. So when they do a cool project, we're like, oh, hey, you've done these 3 paintings. Now, which do you think is the best one to share? What's the highest quality? What comment do you want to put to explain what this piece means to you? And because you have that conversation first, and you, the teacher, are the one who's posting it on Twitter, and it doesn't have to be Twitter. It could be Instagram. It could be any number of things. Then you've taught them those skills so that when they interact on their own social media networks, then they're able to implement the skills that they've practiced in class with your guidance. It's another iteration of I do, and then we do together, and then you do as the student. It's just about social media skills.
It's interesting how social media has changed a lot of our way, and even in like the way we teach our students, it has become kind of like a model of how participation and creation are now being practiced even inside the classroom. But I think all of these like boils down into social connection. Now that we are so immersed into it, and our students are immersed into it, a big part of like this whole practice that we do in our classroom is establishing how to navigate social connection. It gives us a sense of like affiliation or like a sense of belonging because of all these like low barrier platforms that's available right now. It has allowed us to make connection to people from all over the world. think that's what the video of Maddie Brown is like telling us, is that social media has allowed him to become part of a community where he could network and learn from other people. It's a place where he got discovered and like a place for him to be inspired. And more than anything, it's like a place where he feels appreciated and seen. And I feel like there's always a little bit of Maddie Brown